Okay, good morning. In today's video we're going to be adding the hair onto the portrait, and yeah, let's make a start. Okay, so just starting up just by pre-mixing a few colours onto the palette here. Just some browns for the hair. Also, you know, these lighter colours in the browns will also be used on the face for touching up some of the areas on the face when they're needed. Don't always pre-mix colours, sometimes just mix as we go along, but as we're spending such a lot of time just on this one area of the hair, it makes sense to pre-mix just so I've got enough ready mixed of a particular colour in order to use. Okay, so when I start anything like this, I'm basically blocking in the large dark areas. So I'm looking for areas on my screen on the computer where it is basically the dark parts of it, and I put all the darks in first. Having put this colour on initially, it's quite saturated, so put a little bit of Payne's grey onto there just to tone it down a touch, which should help quite a bit. Also, having the grey on the palette won't do any harm, as it's quite useful actually to add some grey into this hair, as there is some grey actually evident within it, so should be quite useful. There are always many different shades in any hair colour. It's very easy to drop on one great big block of colour, almost like a hair helmet. But you really do have to be very selective really in this initial stages, and just to see what shades you can see. You can also start to introduce into there with your brush the actual motion of the hair, even though we're just blocking in, because that will all help. It'll all help in the long run in order to produce a good quality hair on a painting. So using some of the grey now to highlight some of the grey areas that are in this hair. There's not many, but they are there, and the grey is Payne's grey that I've mixed here is been lightened up using some titanium white, and it is actually a very light colour that we've mixed there. It looks dark at the moment-ish on the palette, but in reality it's actually quite a light colour when you put it against some of the other saturations in the other colours. There are many different ways of making hair on a portrait. This is just one way of doing it. I do know that some people, they really will spend hours and hours and hours, and they will draw every single strand of hair, you know, and you can do that. And actually, starting this way, it doesn't stop you from doing that. You can come back and add that sort of detail in it later on. Initially though, I always start it like this. I always block it out, put some blocks of colour into there, and you should end up with something that could be quite useful as hair on a portrait straight away. So we're getting to a stage now. There's a whole lot of hair on there. Some of that will be taken back, but it is in a useful stage at the moment. We can add lots of detail to this. In fact, what I'm now doing is I'm going in with some titanium white, which has been sort of diluted a little bit in terms of its colour, using some of the browns in order to put the highlights in. And how I'm using the brush is I'm flicking in a sort of bit like a cross, if you like. So I'm drawing crosses onto here, so it looks like waves. It's quite a useful way of making curly hair. Now, in this portrait, the girl in the portrait, who's my daughter, Briar, she's actually got incredibly curly hair. It's ringlets almost, which you can imagine if you were going to draw those individually, it's going to be a very difficult thing to paint. Not to draw, to paint. So actually quite a challenge, but by doing those crosses, you can give the impression of ringlets. Okay, so now that we've got that initial hair onto the canvas, I'm mixing up some ultramarine blue and some sap green here. Now I'm mixing quite a dark colour because I want to put it in the background so that I can see the hair against it. The hair is, although it's brown, it is actually surprisingly light. So I'm mixing this colour in the back, which is completely different to the hair colours that I'm using, so that it stands out. So I'm going to drop that colour onto there. That will help me to see where I need to adjust and make alterations. Now the hair is going to be reduced. There's too much hair on there at the moment, and that's been done on purpose because I want to cut it back using this green colour that's going on in the background in order to get the right amount of hair. It's quite easy to underestimate how much you need, and then you end up having to go back over the top of your background, but it's actually easier to remove too much hair than it is to add it onto the background, especially when we're working wet on wet, which is what we're doing here at the moment. So we'll end up removing some of that hair shortly. This background colour probably won't remain. It's going to be lightened up a lot, probably to quite a pale, perhaps a pale grey, something like that, with just a splash of colour in there, because there's enough colour within the actual portrait itself without having to add too much more colour in the back. But this just gives me a bit of a guide to work with the hair. The actual portrait is quite pale, and leaving a dark colour in the background highlights the paleness a little bit too much. So I'm going over this now with quite a hard fan brush, just to blend and to blur in a little bit more. So very lightly touching over with that fan brush before we start putting the detail into the hair. It's easy to forget or to think, well, there's already detail in there, but it's very hard to put a blurred or a softer effect to the hair after you've started to put detail into it. So using the fan brush, I can soften it before I now put the detail in. It's similar to how we started the hair. I'm putting the darks in first, so I put the darker colours, darker shades into there, and again I'm using that sort of that crosshatch, I guess, that drawing of X's onto the canvas, or painting of X's onto the canvas, in order to give the impression of ringlets and of curls. It's a very fast, very fluid motion with the hand, even though it's speeded up on the video. It is actually a really quick way of putting down this effect, so there's no hanging around. It really is just being thrown onto there as quick as I can in order to give the impression of tight ringlets, tight curls in the hair. softening the edge against the face where the hair meets it. It's important to do that and to give a very slight blend into there and very slight detail with the hair where it overlaps the face. That's really important. It can look really odd if you don't do that well enough, if you don't actually blend the two together well enough. It can look very strange. Using a very long brush here, a synthetic brush, and lots of liquid medium in order to water down, well not water down, but to thin and to help flow the paint in order to do these individual strands of hair. Now again, back to the dark colours first. We're using dark colours onto this light in order to put these strands on, and then I will then go back and use the same technique in order to put the lighter tones on top of it again. Drawing and painting these hairs on her face, you've got to not be too worried about making mistakes with that. At the end of the day, if you're going to add something like that across the visage of the face, you've got to be, you've got to just go for it really. And that's the beauty of oil paints, is that if you do make mistakes, it's pretty easy to undo them. So again, putting these sorts of details on, it's a case of just going for it, add them on, see how it looks. If you like it, keep it. If you don't, well, that's not the end of the world. You can take them off. So some of the paint has actually been, I've thinned it down a little bit with some white spirit for some of those curls. You've got to be a little bit careful doing that because we're putting thin paint onto thicker paint, but it helps to get a few of those sort of curls into there. Mostly it's liquid though, mostly liquid. Liquid is brilliant for doing this sort of thing. It really helps the paint to flow. Again, using the fan brush just to put a little bit of softness back into it, not too much. You can seriously overdo it with the fan brush here and reduce all of that detail that you've done. Okay, so now I'm reducing the hair. So I've put a lot of hair on there. Done that, purposefully put too much on there, so I can now reduce it and pull it back. So I'm using my background colour to actually remove some of the hair. Using a rag as well in order to sort of reduce the amount of paint that's on there, just so I don't completely change the background colour. I don't want to muddy it up too much, so removed a bit of that paint. Now I'm going back in with the original background colour in order to paint over the parts which I don't want really, which I don't want anymore. Okay, so I'm going to go back in now and add some strands of hair, some light strands, in the section which I've just removed. This is because the light is actually falling on this side, on the left-hand side of the painting, of the actual portrait rather than of the model of the portrait. So I need to put some light areas into there, and I'm going to go back over. So it's kind of like there's hair there, but it's in sunlight, if you like. I'm going to go back over the top then with some darker colours and using that very fine synthetic brush in order to drop in individual strands of hair. So you can see the dark strands are going on there now, and trying to get them to flow. Again, tricky to make ringlets, but just using that crisscross flowing pattern in order to give the impression of curls. Okay, so going in with a much darker colour now in order to give her the shadow on the underside of these strands of hair that are falling over the face. We'll also have to put highlights in there, but it's easy to forget, you know, think, oh okay, well there's a hair there, that's a particular shade, and you go in there and you put that particular colour onto it, and then don't go back to it. But because these ones do stand out so much, because they are so dominant on the actual image, it's important to go over and to add other colours to it, you know, shadow, highlighted areas, etc., in order to make it look realistic. Now actually on this side of the face there's going to be much more hair added to this, and knowing what the final image looks like, there's a lot of strands that get added to this, so it doesn't dominate quite so much, but again, it's, you know, you're thinking of it, you're using your reference image, you're looking at your reference image, you're thinking, how do I adapt it, how do I change it, because it is only a reference image, you know. It's just, it doesn't, we're not aiming for exactly what's in the photograph, we're aiming for an impression of the photograph that perhaps works better. Okay, I'm considering the top that's going to be painted on. The ends of the hair where it meets the actual shirt, you know, that's not a finished edge within this tutorial, because we have to put that on after we've put the colour of the shirt on. So we actually have to remix some of these colours in order to add them on afterwards. Another day, you know, another day when we've drawn the shirt in. So we're going in with a much lighter colour now, in order to give more depth. Again, it's the difference in values that will give the depth to this image. So the lights against the darks is really important. So we're going in there now. This is going in with some very light titanium white mixed in with some of that burnt umber to make quite a light colour. And actually, I think probably using the raw sienna here with the titanium white as well, just to give it a very slight orangey yellow colour to it. Okay, so now that we have the colours that we're going to use for the hair, I'm going to go back and do things like the eyebrows and the eyelashes and things in order to make sure that they match. Basically, the initial painting of the face was quite a faint painting, and so now I can alter and adjust the values to match the darkness of the hair that we've added to it. In theory, we could have made the hair really light to match the values and the shades in the face, but we haven't done it that way around this time. We're going to go back over, because the face is dry, and we can then adjust some of the colours on top of the face. Adding colours on top of this is good as well, because it will give some real depth to it and deepen the colours that are in the actual portrait face. So it's quite a nice thing to go back and add some more layers, particularly as I used zinc white quite a lot in the actual face on the portrait, and zinc white is pretty translucent, so it did need some more paint added onto this in order to make sure that you can't see some of those lines underneath. One or two were peeking through from the pencil lines from the initial sketch, when the sketch was made on the canvas. So yeah, got to go back and add a bit more colour. So all of these dark areas, so around the nostrils, shadows under the eyes, shadows on the lips, and the colour of the lips as well. They've all been darkened up now in order to match the darkness of the hair, so that it doesn't look like two separate paintings. So it doesn't look like a light image of a face underneath the darker image of the hair. So it's just about getting the balance right and about getting it so that it matches. Okay, just a quick little update. I had to go and swap the batteries on the camera. So, but what I've done is I've removed some of the hair around this area here because it just looks a little bit better like that, and it's a bit more jawline sort of in there to give it some definition. I'm just going to carry on doing that for the moment. I'm just going to pull this jawline back a touch, just so that it looks a bit more delicate. There we go. Let's pull that in. There we go. That's better. Fab. We'll continue. Just going to continue working on this on the face, just to give it a little bit more detail. Okay, there we go. So I added a few more bits and pieces to the face, and adjusted it slightly. I may make the background a little bit lighter. It might be a little bit too dark still at the moment, but it's pretty much there. We'll have a close-up look at it now. There we are. So if you've enjoyed watching that video, if you like what you've seen today, give us a thumbs up, give us a like, and subscribe if you wish to as well. Next video, probably finish off, put the shirt on it, do some fabric, things like that, and get this portrait complete. Anyway, thanks for watching. See you later.